And
Good afternoon, Chris. How are you?
great.
Dave Marsden reporting live from the Virginia State Senate. How you doing?
It's a little bit different than the days we were down there, huh?
It is. It's very different. We still miss you,
Oh, thanks.
and
Thanks.
but it's good to be here today, especially talking about something as important as the discussion we need to have around tax reform in Virginia.
David,
And so I really appreciate your having me on.
it's great to have you. Just to introduce you more formally, this is Senator David Marsden from the 37th District, Senatorial District, which is predominantly Fairfax County.
It's all Fairfax County. As a matter of fact, I'm the answer to a trivia question. Myself and Bill DeSteff are the only two senators with single jurisdictions in the state Senate. He has all Virginia Beach. I have all Fairfax. Everybody else has cities, towns, counties, multiple people to report to.
Okay,
So,
generally speaking, we're in Fairfax County.
it starts on the Prince William Loudoun County line in Centerville down to the almost to Fairfax City, then swings below the city, picking up some of Fairfax Station and Clifton, and then Burke Center, West Springfield, Burke proper, over to the community college there in Annandale. Then I jump the Beltway and go out to Lake Barcroft. So it's
Wow.
about 9/10 of the way across the county.
Wow, that's a big district. Anyway, we're talking about tax reform. Senator Marsden has submitted a piece of legislation. We spoke on the phone last week, trying to create a 21st century tax code for a 21st century economy. Considering the fact that our current tax code is about mid 20th century, we got an opportunity to catch up and move ahead, don't we, David?
We do, and because I've been hearing about this need for a 21st century tax code, I thought I would put some time and effort into creating a starting place that was revenue neutral, and that certainly raised certain taxes, eliminated others, and kind of using this as a footprint for further discussions. I doubt very seriously whether the bill is going to get a long hearing, but what the goal is to get this to your former colleague, Delegate Lee Ware's Tax Preference Committee, which really takes a look at how we want to tax ourselves here in Virginia. And the goal of this, Chris, I make no claims about if you do my tax reform measure that the economy is going to explode. I don't believe that at all. But what I do believe is that we need to start the discussion around making our tax system broader and shallower as opposed to narrower and deeper to smooth out some of the bumps that we have in revenue when all of a sudden one of our narrow revenue sources is going through a tough time, and that hurts state revenue. And if we start the process of looking at everything from a narrow and broad standpoint, those downturns in one particular industry or source of revenue won't hurt us as much. And on the other end, during good times, it won't throw things quite as out of balance.
So if we're too heavily dependent on, say, real estate taxes, and the real estate market has a downturn, we don't get hurt. So is a term to use as broaden the base and lower the rates? Is that
that's sort of the goal? And I got to admit, being a Democrat, this is somewhat progressive in terms of helping folks a little bit more at the lower end of things. When you talk about, and we'll go over the bill in a minute, but when you eliminate the grocery tax, certainly I don't think that a lot of folks in Fairfax County, where median income is our parts of the world is $100,000 a year, but it does hurt. The taxes on groceries, do put a dent in people's pocketbook when most of what they spend is at the grocery store. I remember those days when I was young and starting a family. There were two things we spent money on, and that was the house we lived in and the food we ate. There wasn't much room for anything else. So with three boys, and so that's the idea here, is that we're helping some folks at the lower end of things and trying to put some more money in people's pockets to stimulate the economy there, but again, to generate tax revenue on a broader, shallower basis.
okay? So that's one of there's always, whenever you do a reform on taxes, there's good news and bad news, and you've laid out some of the good news. That's the sweetener in the deal. Let's get to the nuts and bolts. What is David? And I'm going to preface this to the audience. This is a starting position, and you have as you told me last week. You're looking forward to just moving this thing through the process, getting everyone's input, and having a final product at the end of the day. And you're relatively revenue neutral from the outset.
That is correct. It is. Okay. There are people who know a great deal more about this than I do here in this legislature, and it would be presumptuous of me to think that I had all the answers here. But I did go into it with some goals, and I had some folks who are professionals in this area help me out. And what we came up with, Chris, was we're dealing with this in 4 different areas. First is revenue enhancements. Obviously, those are increases in sources of revenue for the Commonwealth. Second, lower taxes on business. Third, reform of costly tax expenditures, in other words, credits, if you will. And fourth, equity enhancement, which are changes to the tax system that would address some of the key equity concerns related to our current system. Okay. So if I could, do you want me to just start with some of the revenue enhancements? Get the bad news out of the way first.
Boom, boom, boom. Hit it.
There you go. Here we go. So there would be some new top rates on individual income taxes. So if you make between $500,000, if your taxable income is $500,000 to $1 million, we're going to ask you to pay an extra 0.5%. If your taxes are over $1 million, for everything over $1 million, you would be taxed at an additional 1%. And so that is, one of the big ones here. And the second thing is that what we're going to include services in the taxes. And what I've tried to do, Chris, is include services that, in my opinion, aren't things that are mandatory, like your car repairs. And that's a service, but something that people can't do without, or their doctor, or their lawyer. You need a lawyer. You've got to have these things, so I don't want those done. So we've come up with some services, and certainly the people in these industries would beg to differ. We're talking about landscaping services, hair and nail laundry and dry hair, carpet and upholstery, body and tattoo and body modifications, garment maintenance, and spa services. That comes up with $72 million. Is if we put taxes on that.
Okay, what was the what's your revenue, David? What's your revenue, Senator Marsden? What's your revenue on the income tax increases?
On the income tax increases?
Yeah, with the 500.
That is $166 million that we would accrue to the benefit of the Commonwealth. Okay. The expanding the sales tax to include services is $173 million.
173. Okay, so you're
here comes the
330 now. 338.
I'm upwards of 330. We're climbing, but we're going to.
I know. First things first.
Back down. and that's right. That's right. Here's that I know that your former side of the aisle had some issues with, which reinstating the estate tax with a $3.5 million exemption. In other words, the first $3.5 million of your estate is tax-free to your kids, but the amount over that would be taxed and bring approximately $140 million annually to the Commonwealth. My position there has been that people say, well, you've already been taxed on that money. Well, if you go out to dinner tonight, you're going to be paying for it with money that you've already been taxed on. Money is taxed when it changes hands, and that's the theory that we're going on here, and that we don't need to protect certain exchanges of money for goods and services, or just to pass it on to your children. That ought to be something. But I recognize that so we've kind of come to a compromise position here, and $3.5 million exemption is somewhat fairly generous. We're going to increase the state cigarette and tobacco taxes. Basically, there's all kinds of things here about rolled tobacco and loose tobacco and whatever, but the bottom line is 40 cents a pack. It keeps us, fairly low. It actually takes, from what I understand, takes about it per pack to actually change people's behavior. But we do feel that our cigarette taxes in Virginia are very, very low. So there is all of the truly bad news right there.
And what's the tobacco?
And,
What's the tobacco? What's the tobacco cost?
40
what's the
cents a
revenue?
pack.
No. What's the revenue you get from that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that would net us $141 million.
Okay, wow.
Annually.
So you're
Okay.
back of the envelope here. I'm looking at 619 million.
There you go. Are you ready? You ready to start climbing down the stairs?
Well, no, I'm just kidding. Look. This is how it's done, right? And for
That's
our
it.
audience, they're going to. I mean, when you go to a committee, they're going, all right, how much is this and how much is this? And they go, wow, that's a number I hadn't considered. But you're at 619 for each year of the biennium, so it's 1.238 billion in the biennium. Is that right?
Right.
Okay.
And so the next thing on the number 2 is lower taxes on business. And this is a reduction in the state corporate income tax by a full point. And that would be a loss to the state of $147 million.
Okay.
So we're coming in the other direction now.
I like your
Interestingly,
analogy there, going down the stairs now.
there you go. It is interestingly enough. I talked to some friends in the business community, and I always thought the corporate tax would be a big deal, but I think for a lot of people, they might, as this goes through the process, they might want to look at some elimination rather than corporate tax in machinery and tools. That is something that would be of more immediate benefit to businesses, because a lot of businesses aren't corporations, and so we may look at doing that through the process, but that's not in there yet. But
Right.
That's exactly what I'm trying to do. I had people come to me saying, "Hey, Dave, corporate taxes is not that big a deal. Even the big corporations, they say, that's not the one that we're concerned about. It's more the machine and tools tax and some other things." So that's the kind of input that I want. But right now, the way the package is, it's $147 million
Okay.
of lost revenue to the state by reducing the corporate tax.
Okay.
And the next thing we're doing is reforming some costly tax expenditures. The first thing is eliminate double dipping issue with certain state tax credits. While most states prohibit taxpayers from claiming a state level charitable deduction for donations that were also eligible for a state tax credit, Virginia is one of only three states that actually allow this type of double dipping, prohibiting tax filers from claiming a charitable deduction if the same donation is also being claimed as part of the Neighborhood Assistance Program of Educational Improvement Scholarship tax credit, for instance, would generate approximately $2 million. So a little small change there. Secondly, we're going to fix the online hotel tax loophole. You'll remember, Chris, that as part of the great transportation bill of 2013 that Governor McDonald got through the legislature, we were attempting to rely on, they were going to do the Fair Market Practices Act in Congress so that you could tax the internet. That hasn't gone through, but apparently there is an ability to tax hotels, hotel reservations, and that would accrue to the Commonwealth in the amount of $8 million per year. Also, extending the sales tax to digital downloads is apparently within the state's capacity to do that. And so that would certainly help us in that regard with some additional revenue. And then equity enhancements, move to a refundable earned income tax credit. This is an investment of $124 million annually. This earned income tax credit helps 343,000 hardworking Virginians, and could even be this could even be stronger. Making the credit refundable would create positive impacts for working families and would counterbalance some of the regressivity of other state and local taxes.
Right.
And lastly,
popular at the
we have
federal level.
eliminated
What's
the
the
state sales tax. What's that?
So the going back to the earned income tax credit at the state level, it's used often at the federal. Not used often. It is used at the federal level for a lot of the purposes you're discussing. How is that a positive for the revenue, or is that a negative?
Well, this is positive for people. This is getting back $124
No. I realize it's
million
positive people receiving it.
annually.
Who about how we're going down the escalator and sort of
Okay, well, we took a couple steps back up,
okay.
in terms of that. But here we get to the big one,
Okay.
which is the elimination of the state sales tax on groceries, which is $381 million.
Oh, okay.
And when we add this all up, Chris, the pros and the cons, we are $12 million. The Commonwealth is out $12 million. So in other words,
you're less than revenue neutral.
A little bit. 12 million is probably a rounding error, to be honest with you.
Well,
but yes,
I mean,
it
right,
is a little less than revenue neutral.
But when you have to, just for the sake of our audience who's not familiar with the budgeting process, when you put a bill in and it has a fiscal impact, it immediately goes to Senate Finance and House Appropriations, and they factor it in to their deliberations when they have to come up with a budget that balances. So a negative 12 to the Commonwealth is a whole. In its totality, right? I mean,
Right.
I think the term rounding error is not totally inaccurate here, but you're asking for 12 million. They're going to go, well, we can probably do X, Y, and Z to balance this thing out. Should they go forward or find it somewhere else, which they always can do if they so choose. But 12 million to the negative, right? So it's a tax cut.
It is essentially the whole bill becomes a tax cut, and done for very selfish reasons, Chris. Is that I didn't want to see brochures in 2019 saying Dave Marsden raised your taxes. So I want to get the discussion started,
really?
But I didn't want to commit suicide. Okay?
Oh, you broke the code early, did you?
Yeah. Yeah, I figured out because the first one was 7 million to the plus, and I said, well, that's not bad. And I said, wait a minute, you've seen those brochures before. But
I've written
again,
those brochures before.
The most interesting thing, though, is that one of the things we had to account for here is that, as you know, taxes are assigned to be ascribed to certain functions of government.
Right,
that this tax goes to this tax goes to that.
Right.
And when you're doing what I'm doing here, you kind of mess with that. So what happens here is the general fund goes up 255 million. K through 12 education is reduced by 216 million. Transportation reduced by 90 million, and local government localities pick up 39 million. Now that's still a minus 12 to the state, but what we do is we put language in an enactment clause that holds all of these categories harmless.
Okay,
so the same amount of money in schools, same amount of money general fund, same amount of money in transportation, same amount of money in localities.
Again, for the audience, let's just back this up. Let's just back this up for the audience here a second. When the taxes right now go to certain buckets, and those buckets pay for certain things. And you mentioned local government, K through 12, transportation. And when you change these taxes, it comes out of those formulaic distributions, and what you're doing is holding harmless at the point of attack, if you will, or the point of entry.
Exactly.
Okay.
You have picked it up. That's exactly right, and the enactment clause will do that. Because as you know, Chris, regardless of what state law is, the Appropriations Act every year trumps all existing state laws. I ran a juvenile detention home. I was supposed to get 50% of my operating costs every year. I think it was down to about 28% when I left because the Appropriations Act every year said, despite what the code says, Dave, here's how much you go get. So that's sort of how it works. Glenn Davis in the House of Delegates has done a similar bill. He goes much further in terms of taxing services.
Right.
And he might be a good one to have on your show as kind of either a counterpoint to me or somebody who has a slightly different take on this. But my understanding is that there's been some interest in doing this, for the first time. I think the last time we did any significant taxation change across the board was in the 30s, and before that it was the 1800s.
Wow.
And it is tax, which is why we rely so heavily on sales and income.
And real estate. It's
and real estate for localities, and
our
localities like mine in Fairfax County. That's all they're allowed to do as a Dillon rule state. Counties cannot just go out and raise taxes like cities can. Counties have to ask permission from the General Assembly. the only thing they have really in their control is the car tax, and but real estate taxes is really the county's only bucket that they're a one bucket
Right.
organization.
Yeah, I did notice you.
Fees and
I did notice you left the car tax alone.
yeah, and I left BPOL alone because
Okay.
anybody who can solve BPOL, deserves sainthood.
Well, Delegate Glenn Davis is going for sainthood, and we have had him on here before. We've got that on our Facebook page. Maybe you can find it somewhere. But hopefully we'll get you both on. Oh, you're gone. You there? Oh, David. David. I think we lost him. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up here then and say goodbye to David Marsden, Senator from Fairfax County. This is Virginia Free. Chris Saxman signing off. We'll have David back on. Seem to have lost broadcast with him, and we hope you've enjoyed this information. We'll look for more in the future. Thank you.